Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Open Observability Talks. I'm your host, Dan Horvitz, and here at Open Observability Talks, we talk about anything DevOps, observability, and open source. So, as I always say, may the open source be with you. And for those joining us on the live stream on YouTube or Twitch, do feel free to ask questions and put your comments in on the live chat. Definitely will be interesting, and we'll take your good questions and make it part of our fireside chat. And with that, let's move on straight to today's episode. For those who remember and are here for some time, remember that a year ago I hosted here on the show Aparna Subramanian, Director of Production Engineering at Shopify. I was very impressed with the engineering skills at Shopify in general, with its Kubernetes adoption, platform engineering practices, and more. And by the way, if you missed the episode, highly recommend the listen. I'll post it here soon. And recently, I came across the internal observability stack at Shopify, built from scratch just 3 years ago, called Observe, a complete rebuild, moving from vendor to in-house development using some open source and really cool stuff. And I realized I had to share that with you folks. So I invited Elijah McPherson, the engineering director who led the complete in-house rebuild of the observability stack, to tell us all about that. So let me add Elijah to the live stream. Hey, Elijah, good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Yeah, great having you. Where are you joining us from?
I'm in Colorado right now, where it's approximately 9 degrees Fahrenheit. So a little cold today.
Cool. And with a t-shirt, but I love the t-shirt with the Observe, the name of the internal platform that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I had the wrap.
That's great. So really, pleasure having you on the show, and you're an observability veteran. We are at Open Observability Talks. You're observability veteran. You worked at Splunk, if I'm not mistaken. So you're perfect guy for the job that Shopify were looking for at the time. So maybe we can start by you telling us about your role at Shopify and why they brought you.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Elijah. I've been at Shopify for approximately 4 years. My role is I lead the real-time storage systems org. So what that looks like is one side of that is observability, and you can think of that as all of the signals for observability: logs, traces, metrics, profiles, exceptions, all the things that we use to measure and see if Shopify is up. We also build the UI from the customer experience all the way back to all of our data stores. So that's the observability side of things. And then on the stateful services side, this is the other part of real-time storage systems. We're responsible for things like ClickHouse for our online analytics use cases, Elasticsearch for our search platform, our jobs platform, which processes somewhere around 40 billion events, 40 billion jobs a day, as well as our caching infrastructure. So that's kind of what I'm looking over at Shopify. But I originally came in for this observability migration and bringing our tools in-house. So that's how I ended up here at Shopify.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a crazy journey. You told me a bit about that, but you really started with when you joined. It's not that it's a startup in a greenfield. They had a very established system with multiple vendors for the different signals, and obviously with quite a complexity. Everything runs production at scale. So can you tell us a bit about this? Why even go about this gigantic step of discarding something like that and building from scratch in-house?
Yeah, I think the first one would be, it's obvious, was cost. At Shopify scale, where I guess planet scale commerce, so to speak, we have a lot of data, right? And we had approximately 3 different vendors, I would say. So one for logs, one for tracing, the one for logs acquired the one for tracing. But then we had, you can think of the I won't mention their name, but a very, very popular observability vendor that we use for a lot of our metrics use cases and for just pretty much our table stakes monitoring. The cost for that was astronomical and trending higher. And it didn't really relate, or we couldn't correlate it to any of our like request or growth metrics. It was essentially we were adding more engineers, they were writing more software, adding more metrics, and the cost kept skyrocketing. And then the second part was we really wanted to bring all of that tooling into one cohesive experience. And so that was the task when I initially joined, was to bring down that cost. And then one thing that's interesting about Shopify is that we really believe in investing in infrastructure. We think in order for our merchants to be successful, we need to have all the plumbing. We need to invest into the things that allow us to scale into a 100+ year company. And so this was aligned with that vision.
Interesting. And was you mentioned several vendors and the cost, but for example, many times when I talk to users in the community that move into either open source or building in-house, do-it-yourself style, it's also the concern about vendor lock-in, especially after vendors did a significant shake that made them understand how much they're dependent on that. Was that a factor for you, or did you feel it less
Yeah,
because you were spread across several vendors?
absolutely. Vendor lock-in. I mean, I'll put it this way. There were vendors who we used for over a decade who essentially tried to triple or aim to triple the price on us within 1 year's time,
Oh
just
wow.
because of the success of Shopify, and they felt like they could. And that was one of the things that's like one of the visions. So if I were going to say like what was the vision, it was like to avoid vendor lock-in, to use like open source based technologies, to empower Shopify, like all of the engineering teams, our customer support teams, to understand the reliability of the system. And then essentially we wanted to create a platform tailored towards Shopify. So but vendor lock-in was one of the top ones.
And I really like the 2 points that you said at the end, which are maybe what I see when people ask me what's the right solution. Obviously, there is no right solution for everyone and each organization. One of the things that I ask usually is about the needs and how much they're tailored to the organization. And really, the two things that you said at the end, both the tailoring to the Shopify engineering practices and so on, and also empowering the team to own reliability. I think this is two things that are material, and usually these are the drivers to go do it yourself, because when you have enough of usually large organizations, elaborate processes, very specific ways of working, then it justifies the investment to do it in-house, really not just off the shelf third party, but something that is first party, something that is tailored to your organizational needs. So
Yeah.
it definitely echoes a lot of the things that I hear in Observability. And I think when we chatted about it earlier, one of the things that I really loved is that you said is like it's that Observe is owned and by Shopify for Shopify. There's some that echoed a lot to me. So I like the mantra that you said that is very resonates very well there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's essentially the goal was another goal was, if you were to come into Observe, right, we want to surface the state of like how is Shopify running right now when you first open it up, and you get this view of like a lot of the key high level metrics. Whereas like if you're in a different observability tool, they're not thinking about all of those key high level metrics. They're going to give you whatever their landing screen is, and we can do things like that. We built in like our team structures into Observe, where by the way, Observe is our internal product. I should for observability, I shouldn't say, but we've built in team structures, so you can land in and see like this high level view of Observe. But then if you take the next step, you can see like what are all the services that your teams own, what are the SLOs for those services, things like that we can build specifically because we know about the internal tooling at Shopify.
Yeah, and it all comes down to also the metadata. I think one of the things that, and I even had lectures about specifically about that, because people are not aware enough about this power of the metadata and how key a role it plays in observability. Like when you own it in your organization, and you can bake this metadata that enriches your signals with the relevant business context, with the relevant environmental context, maybe operational context of how you run, which team owned it, who was the on-call, whichever it is, that is a force multiplier in your observability. So, maybe I will also paste here a link of an article that I wrote about a year ago or so about metadata for observability, which is very good for this one. So I think very interesting to hear is really, now that we understood the mission statement, the goals of the Observe project, is maybe how do you assemble a team to undertake such and you led the team. I mentioned that in the introduction. So also as a manager, you need to compose a team to take something like that, which is magnificent, which has also different aspects. There is the migration, which is massive projects in its own, moving from the previous to the existing, and also obviously the different aspects of building both the backend and the front end UI, and we'll talk soon about the functionality. But how did you approach building the team for this task?
Yeah, I think first we wanted to start from first principles on the observability experience that we wanted. And so one of the first things I knew that we were going to do was look at what was the landscape of observability tooling out there. If I could grab something off the shelf that was open source based and just use it, I would have done that. It turns out there is nothing that's just right off the shelf that would work at our scale. And I quickly realized we're going to need a UI UX team, right? We're going to need to build our own user experience. And so that was one of the things that stood out immediately. And then on the how do we collect all these metrics, all of these data sources, all these signals, and then can we pick something off the shelf? And the answer was no. So I was like, okay, well, maybe let's go tap into some of the open source talent out there. And then really we tapped into some of the talent at Shopify and looked for people who just really wanted to solve really hard distributed system problems. And then we brought those. I start talking to a lot of people and saying hey, does this sound interesting to you? Do you want to do something really, really hard? And then it being Shopify helped because it's hey, you get to do this at planet scale. And so I think it was how we framed the problem and the opportunity to have a lot of autonomy and build something truly I'd never seen someone build an observability platform at this scale based on open source technology. And that was the pitch. I think now having the right people is it's really hard because you don't know what you need because quite frankly, there's nothing else out there like it. So it was what is the characteristics of the type of people we want on this team? And it was people who really, really loved meaty problems and who were, I would say, naive enough to believe that we can do it because a lot of projects like this fail. And so, yeah, I really, in some ways, we hired the right people. We got lucky with some people, and the Shopify brand really helped. So that I'd say that at a high level, but I'm willing to dig into any of those aspects.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm curious, the fact that you had such a good, sharp awareness to the the developer experience early on and what it needs to be, that's amazing, because many go ahead to tackle the back end, which is challenging, admittedly, definitely at scale. But understanding that it all starts with, especially what you said before, providing a cohesive experience, that's something very important. Did you find a need to have a dedicated product owner or product manager type of a persona within the team?
Yeah, we did have a dedicated product owner that we got from within Shopify, and she came and was really helped kind of rein in all these crazy ideas that we had, and helped do a ton of the user research. So that was really helpful. Another thing we did was we built an in-house support team of a few people to
Nice.
really just kind of answer a lot of there's thousands of engineers at Shopify, and answer a lot of their questions, understand what that user experience was from beginning to end. And it was helpful because they didn't come from an observability background. And so as they were using and testing the product, they were giving us feedback and we would iterate based on that. So that was really helpful as well.
Nice, nice. In past life, I used to be a product manager, and one of the things that I see that is people don't understand that the importance of product manager when it comes to internal platforms, because they assume because it's not the thing that you sell to your end customers, that's okay. So it's the engineering problem. So engineers will take care of that, and they don't understand that this is a product for all things and purposes. The only difference is that the users of this product are internal users within the organization. But for the way to elicit, to define the needs out of the and understand the day-to-day and the processes and the pains and the needs, and the experience that you need to generate out of that, it's just yet another product, and also obviously iterate. So it's not a one-off project, because some project manager that maybe or program manager that does it one off. It's something that needs to then be refined constantly. You release something, you need to get the feedback and then tune it. So that's like a product sense. So obviously, if you're lucky enough to have some, I don't know, one of the team leads that has a product sense, that's great. But the product sense is important here.
It's extremely important. I think one of the things that I tell everybody on the team, regardless if you're working on metrics or data storage infrastructure, we are product minded, right? Because ultimately people are going to consume this and they're going to need to use it. And so that's the lens I think of all infrastructure. I think of it through this product based lens because ultimately it's serving our customers, our merchants. And so I think that's always important. The other thing is like when your customers are internal and they're engineers, they're like right there and they'll let you know. And this is a challenge because like engineers don't like having their tooling change, especially ones that they need for the reliability of their systems. And so that was one of the challenges as we worked through this migration was people would let us know when they weren't happy. And but it's also like a blessing at the same time. So yeah.
No, definitely. And I think you said that we talked about the team that you assembled. It's important to say the team didn't only or doesn't only build the product. This is also the team that owns and manages the product, right? Observe.
Yes, the team manages everything from the infrastructure. Um, we're on call for it. Uh, Everything. It's you can almost think of it as a little self-contained company in a way
Yeah.
within our infrastructure organization at Shopify, and our customers are a Slack message away. So yeah,
So that's why I was saying, because
yeah,
the skill set that you need in your team when you assemble the team needs to factor in both the development, which is more, let's say, coding and things like that, but also the operational side of running it at scale, at massive scale, doing the internal support,
yep,
if you will, and as you said, also product and UX. So it's really like, as you said, a product, in-house product that has all these different functions that you would find in a software company, right?
yep.
Amazing. So let's talk about the functionality. What does it provide? Let's start detailing what Observe is about.
Yeah, so I would say upfront, it is essentially, well, I'll take a step back. Observe is built on Grafana, open source Grafana, which we really use as a framework of sorts. So, like, you can think Grafana has a lot of offerings, but they have this plugin feature that allows you to essentially write React code, TypeScript right inside of um, a code base and then ship it right as a plugin. And we leverage that heavily. So the functionality is really we take a Grafana and then we build a bunch of things like we've built our own alerting system, we've built our own data explorer, we've built tools that we call investigate. And what these are is like, okay, you need your basic stable takes monitoring, right? You need to be able to measure things, dashboard, you need to alert when things don't look right. But then we took it a bit further. We have things that are like our internal team system. We've pulled that in, and then now that's overlaid into Observe. And then you can say, okay, for this team, I want to view or add SLOs for it. I want to have all of your internal Slack channels that we know are scoped to your team. We can correlate that with you. We can align that with your team. And then you can just, with a few clicks, wire all your alerts up straight to your Slack channel. Or because it's your team, we'll just say, okay, you haven't wired that up, but we know that this is your team channel for handling incidents and things like that. We can just wire that up. The other thing is we've built this product, and I think this is really amazing. We call it Investigate. And so think of like all of the signals that you can think of around observability: logs, metrics, traces, profiles, whatever. I don't subscribe particularly to like one, but just like all the things that matter for investigating something. So we've tied that in, and then we allow people to explore that data via this ad hoc query interface that we have. And we correlate things like the Shopify context. So we have this concept of background jobs and Shopify request, and we can tell you which compute nodes it hit for a given request. So we try to correlate all of that and put it right in front of our users so that they can understand the given journey a request took through Shopify, but not only at the tracing level, but at like the infrastructure and the compute level and things like that. So, yeah.
Amazing, and I think the correlation is really where the power of observability starts to manifest itself. Because for too long we've been preoccupied with the raw data, with metrics, with logs, with traces, and profiles, also the newer one. But still, it was like vertical. So you worked with traces in a specific way, a specific tool, or even within the tool, the same tool. So it was, but a specific view, and it was very disjointed. And I think the fact that you can bring all of that together, fuse all of that together, and query across the different signals, this is where true observability starts to manifest. And I'm actually curious, what language do you use to query across the different signals?
So we have an internal one that we just call, it's called Investigate API, and it's a structured language to do that. But like you can still query the independent sources. So our logs, our logs and tracing are all in-house built, like from the ground up. Our metrics is built on Thanos, the open source Thanos, but like with a bunch of extra things that we've layered on top. But so from the ground up, we had this investigate query language, as we call it, that allows you to submit all kinds of analytics queries and things like that. And we return those results. And we're trying to unify that across all of our signals. So that's pretty much the query languages we support: Investigate API, query language, and then PromQL.
Nice. Actually, there's it's been something that I've been missing, and not just me, obviously, for a long time in observability, the fact that we don't have a unified query language for observability, and even the languages were disjointed. So you used PromQL for the metrics, and then you used LogQL or Lucene or whatnot for the logs, and so on and so forth. So and there is an initiative, by the way, now wearing my CNCF ambassador hat. There is an initiative under the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, to explore a unified query language, like standardization of the query language. So there's a working group designated for that. I even hosted an episode here on the show a while back that I started that I discussed that. I put a link here for the people on the live stream. I'll share it also on the show notes for the people on the podcast. But yeah, this is interesting to see, because since we don't have a standard out there, then what large organizations, especially, what they do is do exactly what you did. They create their own internal unified way of querying the data across the signals, at least those who understand the value and the power of observability. And you mentioned like the alerting and the different teams. So obviously this is not the alerting tool, right? You can then route it downstream to other places where the teams can get flagged and respond, or how do you do that?
So our alerting tool is based off of our metrics tool. So we've built our own alerting stack,
Okay.
and it's essentially querying against PromQL. At a global level, we can do global alerts across the whole fleet of our infrastructure. And then, given that we really only support two query languages, Investigate API and PromQL, we in our user interface, you can kind of come in and either write the raw query or use our query builder, which is going to be very similar for PromQL and Investigate. And then what will happen is, regardless of the data store, what we'll do is we'll run those rules against whatever query API, turn those into metrics, and then run that against our alerting infrastructure, which is our in-house built thing, and then say, okay, where do we want to route this alert to? And all of that's configured, I guess, separately in Observe. So we have these components that kind of compose And as long as you essentially have Investigate API and we can query it, we can alert just about on anything. And the cool thing about Investigate API, it's really if you have essentially time series data with a timestamp and a bunch of columns, we can essentially run a query against it and alert on it. So, yeah.
Nice. So you mentioned a few open source tools already. Let's just list it up so people understand how what the basic components, and a lot of that, by the way, you built in house, to give you the credit. But first, really the things that you did find useful within the open source stack. Can you run us through this?
Yeah. I think we use a lot of different things from the open source. So I'll start on the metric side. We've used StatsD because our last vendor, if that is a hint into who they are, they were historically StatsD. They have their special flavor of it, and so we still use StatsD. It was not feasible for us to go and re-instrument all of the software at Shopify, so we allow that. We still, though, allow the exposition format, so open metrics from all of our applications, so you can instrument metrics that way. We
For
do
those who
run
don't know, just to mention, Open Metrics is the exposition format for Prometheus. So that's like the
exactly.
Prometheus native, which is now becoming, I guess, a semi-independent specification.
Yeah. But so we allow that. On the collection side of metrics, we have a couple different things. We built this thing that we call like StatsD load balancer. And what this does is it allows us to take StatsD packets from all of our different targets that emit metrics from our applications, do things like aggregate or drop or combine labels. And then that in turn gets scraped by, we have a StatsD exporter that gets scraped by Prometheus agents within the cluster. And these are just essentially lean Prometheus agents that scrape these targets. And there's a smart component in between that knows how to do service discovery with that. We rewrote out of Prometheus, and like we took it out of Prometheus and separated some of these concepts. And there's a talk that in that list of talks, if you want to see how we did that. And then we write those to a global, conceptually global Thanos. It's like a fleet of mini Thanos, which is the open source distributed Prometheus query engine and collection engine. But we essentially write it there. So that's the metric side. And then that gets rolled up and stored in GCS, which is Google Cloud Storage, right?
Yeah.
So that's the metric side. The tracing side, we actually run, I think I'll take it further ahead. We run Rails. We're a Ruby shop here at Shopify. Our core monolith is written in Rails. So we employ a couple of the open telemetry Ruby maintainers here at Shopify. And so we do a lot of the instrumentation with open telemetry. And then we have an open telemetry collector that essentially gets a lot of our traces, to capture a lot of our traces, and then write that to our trace ingestion API. That's a lot. And then the same with our logging stack. That's a little bit more bespoke that we've built in-house. But behind all of that, we use different data stores like ClickHouse as well. So a lot of different open source tools there. Yeah.
And interesting, like, you had, I think one of the things that you consolidated when you moved, we talked about moving from multiple vendors of observability. There was also multiple storage engines that you wanted to reduce, right? And simplify.
Yeah, I mean, the storage engines were really these vendor-based storage engines, and we tried a couple. So ultimately, everything ends up in object storage, but we really have only a couple now. So on the ingest side, we need to hold these things in memory as they're coming in, and then write them to disk and be able to query them fast enough. And so for that, that's just Prometheus-based Thanos, right? And then on the logging and profiling and tracing side, that's just ClickHouse, so to speak, with an API that does some magic in front of it. So, yeah.
Nice. And and on the UI side, as you said, it's built on Grafana. But again, it's very important to say that when we say Grafana, you didn't take it as is, but you did really you forked, right, your own, and you did your own additions.
Yeah.
You started talking about data sources, plugins, and so on. Can you tell us a bit about what's your journey with adapting Grafana to your needs?
Yeah. First off, like Grafana has been like a great partner for us. We really like Grafana. The UI, so like we do run a fork, but we don't really. There's a minimum amount of changes because um, we don't want to like get too far out of sync. Like Grafana does a lot of really cool changes, and we still want those, right? So our fork is just little things around navigation that we improved upon for like our needs. Um, but then the plugin of extension format is essentially allows you to hook in and essentially write whatever you once you like get into your plugin land, you can write whatever you want, really. And so we truly just use the routing system. It's like a React router, and we route to a page, and then you have like full access to like some of these Grafana primitives. And then we just write our own custom software. Like we have our own UI packages for certain elements and things like that. And that is, I mean, that's been a really, really good experience for us. Where things did not work out as well was around like, for instance, alerting. Um, I can't even remember all the details when we first took on alerting for Grafana. We wanted to use theirs off the shelf, but it was like scoped to a MySQL database, or and that database was not distributed, so to speak. And if you were going to rely on that for your alerting, if you had a problem in one region, your alerting was down. So like we had to rethink that. And so we built this specific tool internally that we call Shopify Monitoring API that we could simply just call out to from our Grafana plugins to do all of things like alerting. Another one was this was actually really cool. The vendor that we came from had really, really good UI around querying metrics, almost so good that many of our users didn't even know how to write a query language for it. And so it's like, great, like they've done their job. And we're like, how do we emulate that? And we had we had performance problems in Grafana specifically because the amount of metrics that we had just would doing auto completion and querying those things were essentially trying to pull down over a gigabyte of like auto completion data based on it. Just never expected to have that many metrics or time series. And so we had to really build our own custom UI there and then build an API that allowed us to have all of the metadata and auto completion. So it was just like a ton of problems like that really, I'm not sure it was Grafana, but more so the vendor that we came from built a really great user experience, and we needed to match that, so to speak. So yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, I put a link in the for the folks on the live stream for a post that you posted on LinkedIn with a list of lectures that you gave. That's actually amazing that you were willing to share that publicly with the community about like an internal conference that you did, where the individual team members explained about the different pieces, like a whole internal conference about different dimensions of Observe. So check out the post. It's on the LinkedIn profile of Elijah. So really recommended to see for deep dives. But I think the journey there, and also exploring the alternatives, because it's not that you decided, some go really strong-headed about going to do it yourself without checking. You to your defense would say you checked what is out there. And I remember even from before when I asked you things like, okay, but did you look at alternatives? Okay, Grafana alerting wasn't scalable enough, but like Cortex or other things. And you told me like you really went in and delved into what is out there before you either picked something existing or went to implement your own, right?
Yeah, and we had experience running Cortex I ran Cortex when I was at Splunk with the team. We tried it here at Shopify. We tried a bunch of different things. we tried Thanos and it didn't work out of the box. And so, yeah, it just took a lot of trial and error. And I think that's one of our big takeaways was at a certain scale, vendors are too cost prohibitive, but also it's really, really hard to build something just as good. And you really got to invest in the tooling, right? If you're going to take something like this on. So, yeah.
And I think one of the other things that we talked about is really beyond the cost is that when you look at a third-party vendor, you will always end up with I don't know, lowest, but at least a low common denominator. So you're good the table stakes monitoring and observability, but what happens when you want to go up the stack into something that is more product related or business related and so on, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think maybe one of the only ones that aren't that way is maybe Grafana, because most of their things are built on open standards, which I really liked. But I think that's pretty much the where you'll find yourself with most of these vendors. And then I think a lot of them, and rightfully so, they add a layer of, hey, this is really, really good, but it's not open source. And if you want that thing that's really, really good, it's likely going to lock you in a bit. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely. And you mentioned open standards, and I think in that as well, you went for adopting open standards as an internal guideline. You already mentioned some of the things. Whether StatsD is also a standard. It used to be a standard in the days of pre Prometheus and so on. So the veterans would remember that this was like the classic way of collecting and the metrics and so on. And so whether StatsD that's established and the newer ones you mentioned already, OTel, you mentioned the Prometheus metrics exposition format, the open metrics and so on. So take us through how you approached this open standards element.
Yeah, I mean, our approach was pretty simple. It's like what works. So oddly enough, I had a strong opinion initially on push based versus pull based, and I was like pro pull based, and then which we still do to some degree, but I think there's some really cool elements that came or some cool characteristics of being able to do push based metrics because you can push them to a central location and do aggregation and things fairly easy, where with our pool-based use cases a little bit more difficult. But really our process was, okay, we still like pool-based metrics. We're going to support that because not every application at Shopify is written in Ruby, or there's a lot of Go applications. There's many services there. So like we're going to support that. And quite frankly, you get it for free with once you do service discovery, which we had to implement anyway. And then the StatsD thing was just simply easy. OTLP and like open telemetry, like the semantic conventions are really, really helpful because it gives us that common language for understanding infrastructure and then like picking up different tools and just using them, right? And so we even do this with our custom logging, even if we don't use like open telemetry directly, but we try to like label all of the attributes and things and align them well to the same standards. So, yeah.
Yeah, and many people don't understand. They think about OpenTelemetry, they think about the tool. Okay, so I have a tool to, I don't know, SDKs and client libraries to instrument, and I have maybe a collector to fetch things and process them. But I think a cornerstone of OpenTelemetry is actually the specification piece that many people don't directly get exposed to it, but it underlines everything. It creates this common language that allows us to avoid needing to either tailor it to the specific tool that provided the telemetry, or on the other side also figure out our own data model for presenting it. So obviously, if we need to augment that with our own very specific organization specific things, we will do that. But at least for the things that are the common language across the operating system, the container level, the pods, things that are trivial, and you want to correlate between them. This thing you have, and going also beyond that. I'm actually, for example, part of the special interest group, a SIG within OpenTelemetry, that talks about standardizing on CI/CD for observability. So creating these semantic conventions to how you describe CI/CD pipelines and the runs and so on. This is something that is just a discussion about, essentially, especially at this point, just what the semantic conventions are.
Yeah, I think the specification is the best part of OpenTelemetry, if you ask me, right? Like, it gave organization to a lot of chaos, right? And everybody doing things their own way. So, I think it's the best part and the most valuable part of OTel.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think when you talked about use case like that where it fell short, I'm actually curious to also hear. So we all, I'm an advocate of open source, and I talk about a lot about here and other places about OpenTelemetry and things like that. But when you run it at your scale, tell us a bit about also the challenges in adopting these open source projects to your needs and your scale.
Yeah, I think well, it's just not OpenTelemetry, but like instrumentation's not free, and it costs to run these processes and collect these things. And from our experience, we saw it with StatsD as well, right? Where things were just taking a ton of CPU cycles and resources from the nodes that were running these things on. And the same thing was true for OTLP, where it was just like expensive to push this over the wire this way, right? And essentially parse it, right? And we're like, hey, can we do something better? Because at our scale, like 1%, 2% in CPU savings is massive, right? So things like that, where this is why I say embrace open standards until they fail you. And it's really about like, what is the heart and what is the intention behind it? And we try to align to that. And then we step out of we call out the lines a bit when we need to. So yeah.
And we talked about also before a bit about the business element, so that as an organization you don't want to only talk about the infrastructure layer. So can you tell us a bit about how you monitor the health of the business using the same observability platform that you provide?
Yeah, this was interesting for me, because when I came to Shopify, I was like, we built our observability platform with initially, this was like a place where we maybe missed a bit with this mindset of like infrastructure focused. And then as we were building it, we're like, hey, like everybody's alerting globally across everything. And we're like, why? And then it turns out like people straight up have many business metrics that they're measuring right in the code base. And I was a little bit apprehensive at first. And then I was like, it actually makes sense. The only limitation really is cost. But if we can get that down, why not have many of those business metrics right alongside with a lot of your infrastructure metrics? And so Shopify measures many just with our standard libraries of business health metrics right in Observe, and are able to alert on those things right within Observe. And so I think if that's going to be the fastest online way to get notified if something's unhealthy, then I think it's appropriate for it to be within the observability tooling.
And what kind of, give us an example of what kinds of things are interesting on the business layer, maybe even correlation from the business layer to some infrastructure root cause, or something that maybe should be less trivial to listeners?
Yeah, I would say things like we check out success rate. People do certain things around like campaigns of like, what is the success rate of this campaign within Shopify, right? Or like this marketing campaign, or things like that, right? Where you just would not think that it would be there. Or conversion rates of things are measured right in Observe. And then If conversion rate's down, great. Like, what is the request rate for that same service? Oh, that's actually that's also like that's actually really, really high, but the success rate is bad, right? So you get to look at all of that in one specific user interface. Whereas before, how would you know the request rate and essentially the red metrics for the same service that handles buyer conversion or lead conversion, so to speak? So we do things like that. That's just one example.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. I want to go back to the migration, because this, for those who have done that either in-house or as consultants or architects, this is massive. And I'm curious how you approach this migration. And how do you build a migration path from the old system to observe the different elements? Can you run us through successfully undertaking such a migration when this is also the system that runs it? You know, you don't stop operating Shopify for half a year to do that. So you need to keep on, obviously, the
Yeah.
business going.
Yeah. I think the first thing was proving out scale, right? So can we ingest all the same metrics reliably, right? And then can we query many of those metrics reliably, right? So I think that was the first thing, is just building confidence in what we've built as a replacement. And so it's like, well, okay, how do you know that? We now need to somehow tee up this data, right? So one of the things we did was, in between the vendor that we had and our initial metric system, we built a specific component that could essentially tee off and split the rights to both of our clusters, right? To our vendor and to our internal product. And so we ran that as soon as we could, right? Because we needed historical data, right? So that was the first thing. It's like, get ingestion working at scale, be able to query it. And then it was, okay, now we have a ton of, like, 13 years worth of dashboards and alerts. What do we do about this? And we explored things like, can we port these things over? Should we like automatically import all the dashboards, all of the alerts? And then we ultimately came to like, well, this has been around 13 years. Is there like a way to figure out if these things are even used anymore? So we had to build a ton of tooling to understand whether or not a metric is even being queried, if it's being used um, for alerts and things like that. And it turns out a lot of them weren't. And so we then said, okay, we got to tackle the hardest problems first. And we have like mini service, but let's go after core, like the big monolith. And what we did was we broke everything out into these cohorts where we said, we tried to like say, like, what are the characteristics of this app? What's the importance of this app? And we broke them out into cohorts, created kind of spreadsheets of a lot of spreadsheets, reached out to teams. But this is where like it was really important for us to build that internal tooling to understand the team layout at Shopify, because we were able to say, like, here are all the teams. Let's break them out into their own spots within Observe, their own groups, so to speak. And then one by one, they were able to give the green light on if they were successful or not. So we had a lot of tooling there. And then all kinds of docs. It was, let's say it was quite a while. And then just the preparation side of it. And then the actual migration itself took us maybe actually less than 3 months, believe it or not. And
Wow.
because we had a mandate, we had all the data. The thing that was really challenging for us was when we rolled this out and said, like, you must migrate to this new tool. We have like 6 months of your data. Was, oh man, people are querying this in ways that we just could not expect, because the vendor that we had before did not give us complete access into the query patterns. And so that was, we had to really, really invest in a short period of time into making the Thanos query engine for our metrics scale and rewrite. One of the engineers on our team, I think we rewrote the PromQL execution engine. That's how in the weeds we were to essentially be able to split it out and push the queries down to different leaf nodes in our systems. lot of like, we can go deep on that at some other point, or maybe we can have one of those engineers come on. But yeah, just challenges like that. So it was just a series. Ultimately, it was a series of very, very hard technical challenges where we did something and then we waited for feedback and then we kept doing it. And
But
yeah,
beyond the technical challenges, I'm curious also, obviously, there's a lot of educating users, the users' expectations themselves to manage. Can you tell us a bit also about how to, because it is a massive organization that is used to working a certain way and you're moving their cheese. So
yeah,
can you tell us a bit about also that aspect?
yeah. That aspect is, well, like it's a couple things. Shopify, we thrive on change, and so that's like just baked into our culture. That you should expect a level of chaos in the day-to-day work. So like we had that going for us. The big challenge was getting, like, we had to get buy-in from a lot of the leaders. Like you have all these competing priorities, and it needed to what we really needed to do that helped us was like show people what they could have that they didn't have, um, by moving to Observe. And we added many features like that. I think if we would have tried to launch Observe across Shopify without some of these additional like features, it would have failed. And that was huge for us. We had a lot of pushback on some things because, quite frankly, Observe was not good enough when we first launched it. And that was the buy-in thing, was that we had buy-in from our leadership team. We proved that this thing could scale. However, um, we needed to our executive leadership team had to be committed to this, right? And I think stakeholder management is very, very important if you're going to do something like this.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
That's a good tip. And by the way, another thing that you said is a side note that I find very central is that actually, as painful as these migration projects are, these are also compelling opportunities to do cleanups. So my advice would be, and sounds like you did that, is to use that opportunity not just to copy paste or migrate one to one, because especially an organization that's been running for such a long time, because this is the opportunity to do data cleanups, dashboard cleanups, maybe better optimize the metadata, things like that that you don't never find the time to do when you're in the status quo of a certain tool. But when you move from one to the other, this is a compelling event, let's say, to do this cleanup. So this is my bit of advice that sounds like also that you folks did very well.
Yeah.
So we're about to get to the end of the episode, and I'm actually curious now to wrap up this entire. You've been there for 3 years, and sounds like a journey of a lifetime from joining until now. And now your role even expanded. We even had the chance to talk more about that part, which is beyond observability into the real-time streaming and data storage, like ClickHouse management and things like that within Shopify. But the two dimensions here. One is that you did something that is very specific, so a specialized tool for Shopify's needs. So I'm curious, and on the other hand, you came from Splunk, so you've seen the solving the general purpose problem as a third party. So when you take your aggregated experience, what from this journey would you advise, like the best practices that you would give out of that are general enough to be used by other organizations?
Yeah. There's a couple things. I think people should use open source wherever possible, right? Um, Measure what is actually, like, you don't know what's important. So like yet. So like there's this whole observability 2.0 things that everybody's talking about. Like tracing's great, right? Like we love it, right? Like I do think metrics and logs still have a place. And I think measure and monitor what you know um, could go wrong. And then I think invest a bit into workflows for resolving that. I find that to be a big gap still. Like, it's like, yeah, we're going on to the ambiguous, like we can search and find anything. but like by the time you've had an incident, like maybe it could have been prevented because you had workflows for very known incidents. And I find people don't invest in that. And so I think we should invest there. Another thing is running, if you're going to run this yourself, right? If you're running like your observability platform yourself, I think having expertise, going out and finding somebody who is who's plugged in into the community is really, really helpful. It's gotten us really far, having people who are contributors to open source projects. Regardless, actually, I would say even if you are running on a vendor-based solution, it's very helpful to have people who are plugged into open telemetry and who understands where the industry is going as far as observability. And then, I don't know, I would say, lastly, like profiling. I think this is actually a thing that we miss out on. I would say at least at our scale, but I imagine it's applicable to either even smaller companies, is having a feedback loop on the performance of your application in the real world, where you can make optimizations. Like that's not specific to any organization. And I think for us, we've seen massive wins. We want our software to be fast. And the only way to, like, I can tell you, like, using traces and things like that, it's still running as fast as it was before, but it doesn't tell me if I can be faster, right? And so, and more performant. And we found ways to reduce our infrastructure footprint as well as get faster. So, yeah, those are a few tips I would pass on, I guess.
And maybe one last question from this: what kinds of organizations would you recommend setting out on such an adventure of reinventing their own in-house observability stack, unlike taking on a third-party vendor or an open source as is, not the tailored version that you've done?
Yeah, I would recommend it has to be cost effective for you, I would say, or valuable enough to do something like this. I would say similarly scaled companies like Shopify, I would say it's probably worth it at that point. I think for many smaller companies, I would actually just recommend something like Grafana, because you get a really good product, and you also get open standards that you can, if you chose to move away, you can. And they're also helping people move away from many of the vendor locked, a lot of people with vendors who have a lot of lock-in, they're building tooling to get people off of those vendors to open standards. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, many good friends from the community that I know
Yeah.
they work at Grafana and are significant contributors and advocates for the open standard. So I definitely second that. And I think what you said, like owning your own destiny, especially when prices skyrocket with the scale. So usually it comes with a scale when you have enough of a scale to justify such a project. But then owning your destiny manifests in the very many zeros on the bill, and also the fine tuning, as we said, to be able to really have not just a table stakes type of observability, but really much deeper observability into your business, your critical workflows, your entities that you have within the organization. So I think this is, for me at least, this is the main thing. So we reached the end of the episode, and I feels like I could have chatted much more. But thank you so much, Elijah, for joining me and for sharing all these insights from your amazing journey.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And again, for the listeners, I put the link here, and I'll put it on the show notes as well. There's a great full day, essentially conference that Shopify did. It has amazing lectures about Observe that deep dives into each and every one of these. There's a great post that Elijah posted on LinkedIn that specifies all of this. So you have the link there. Check out his profile and check out all the lectures. I think it's great. And with that, I'd like to thank the listeners, for everyone who joined us on the live stream or listening. As always, all the episodes can be found on your favorite podcast apps or on YouTube. And if you do consume it there, know that we stream the episodes live on YouTube Live and Twitch. So follow us. We're on, used to be on Twitter X. We're now moving away more towards Blue Sky and on LinkedIn to check out the live stream times and to stay updated on more deep dives like that. So with that, I'm Dotan Horvitz. Thank you very much for listening. And as always, may the open source be with you.